look like and sort of the structure behind it, and hopefully what we will all walk away from in our discussions. So one of the things that was really exciting, I think, even in the morning session, was Mike Duguay's sort of big vision of thinking about larger trends happening in the state, and then Kevin and Jim drilling down to the sort of very local level to think about how those bigger themes were sort of playing out from a development and from a land use perspective on the ground. So that sort of really exemplifies the theme of this convening, which is thinking about local flexibility as it relates to regional alignment. So that is very much going to continue to be the theme this afternoon, with an extension of what happened, the discussions we had here this morning. So the way in which this afternoon is structured is we're going to sort of think about the role that data can play in highlighting those statewide themes and then drilling down to the local level. And then we're going to break out into, and it's going to be led by Charlotte, who's our amazing data person at MCOG. And with that sort of data background in the back of our heads, we're going to break out into thematic discussion sessions. So there are going to be four: one around transportation, one around housing, one more broadly about the economy, and one around environmental sustainability. So the data that we're going to present really speaks not only to some of the themes that Mike was talking about, but that MCOG is sort of proactively addressing and working with communities around. So we're interested to know which of those themes are sort of most pressing for you, and we'll ask you to sort of self-select into those rooms. Housing will be here, transportation will be right next door, and the economy and sustainability will be where people had lunch in the red room. So the idea is, with this data background that Charlotte is going to present, to sort of think about what you've learned, what you wish you still knew more about, and bring it to your more specific thematic conversation after the data presentation. And once Charlotte's presented, once you've had time to talk about sort of how these trends show up in your communities, we're going to come back together and sort of think about the larger themes that emerge from each of those conversations and how it relates to this bigger theme around local flexibility and regional alignment. So that is the vision for this afternoon. So thank you all for sort of sticking with us, and it should be a really great conversation. So without further ado, we'll have Charlotte present on some great data. Sorry, Jim. Is it okay?
No, that's my fault.
Okay. Great. I'm great with data, not with technology. So yeah, next year will be the update of the strategic plan.
One more time.
Well, we can just go here.
To the That should be good.
Okay. So general steps for municipal support. We often start off with the data. We really like to ground our technical assistance in the data that we provide. And then the next step is talking to the community planners in our organization for that technical assistance. So with that, we're just going to dive right into the data within each of the topics and talk about some of the technical assistance associated with those topics through MCOG. So first, our data resources. If you haven't seen this page yet, or if you haven't looked at it recently, I encourage you to go to our website under Maps and Data, hover over that tab, and then second down, that Story Maps right there. That'll be your friend. That's our data bank for a ton of different topics. So starting with sustainability, we're enrolled in we're a service provider in the Community Resilience Partnership. We have a lot of communities enrolled in that. If your community is interested, feel free to reach out. We've just done a big culverts analysis in Knox and Waldo and Saginaw counties. Reach out to Meg if you're interested in talking further about culvert support. And then we're going to get into the social vulnerability assessment because that has a lot of data in one of those story maps, and it's a hopefully really useful technical assistance piece for our communities. So what is a social vulnerability assessment? It sort of identifies communities or populations that are most vulnerable to big shocks, such as natural disasters, public health events, etc. So, it identifies risk factors for those populations and then can really inform emergency planning for that. So there's two phases. There's data collection, of course, and then the qualitative assessment. And that's really taking that data and, thinking about it within the context of your community. Every community here is different. We are so diverse on the coast of Maine, and the data can mean different things for each of the different communities. So we have a whole story map of data for the social vulnerability assessments, and that means that step one is done. So for step two, just reach out to MCOG and we can help, kind of synthesize that data and relate it to your communities. So we're gonna just get into kind of some of the teasers from that. I just pulled out some highlights. This is cost burden households, by owner over on the left there and renter on the right. And we see, on the right side with the renters, there are so many communities where half of the renter occupied homes are spending more than 30% of their income on housing, and they're so cost burdened. And that is, that is really an identifier for a at-risk population. Meanwhile, owner-occupied homes are our municipalities, none with over 50% cost burden households, but there are some pretty high percentages in there as well. Moving on, when we think of sustainability, we think more environmental, I wanted to touch on some FEMA data as well. And this first map here, I think a lot of us have seen the FEMA data, and we can kind of understand where the 100-year floodplains are, but what does that really mean? And so these maps try to kind of dig in further into what the data really shows. This first map on the bottom here shows the percentage of parcels that are affected by the 100-year floodplains in FEMA. It's hard to see, building overlap, but it is a proxy for which communities are potentially more vulnerable, rather than just looking at the floodplains themselves. And it's important to note that the 100-year floodplains seem to happen every 5 to 10 years now instead of every 100 years. So, and then this map up at the top there, we're overlaying the FEMA flood data with percentage of people making 80% of area median income. And that's by census block group. So that's a smaller area than a town. So we can really identify that intersection of flood risk and low income vulnerable populations as well. Then This is a data set from the Maine State Economist, or it utilizes a data set from the Maine State Economist. On this first column here, we have age, and then these are years. And so this is, they have updated the data. We have not yet updated these charts or tables, but this 2020 data, this is all measured. So the numbers in the cells are the number of people at this age range in this year. So this is measured, and then this is all predicted, 2025 to 2040. And then it's color coded, so higher people in that cell is a darker color, so you can kind of try and visualize a table and not just see the numbers. So I just kind of look at the colors. And we can see, in Saginaw, there's, 55 to 64 is a kind of higher age bracket, more populous age bracket, and that cohort ages along. But there's kind of an entrance of a new cohort that's more, family age. So it's somewhat spread out in terms of age, but it is certainly getting older. Whereas in Knox County, we see that cohort aging, and we don't see it being replaced by, another family age cohort. And by 2040, the most populous age bracket is 85 plus. And this is straight from the Maine State Economist predictions. And so, this relates to so many things. It relates to vulnerability, it relates to housing, transportation, economy, everything. And so with that, we'll go to economy. Again, I'm going to go over some of our technical assistance, or kind of, I guess, not just technical assistance, but our programs within the economy section. And then I'll get into some data. So first up is our loan program. We offer low interest rates to somewhat riskier businesses who may not otherwise be fully funded by a bank. Those are often, the types of businesses that make up the Midcoast as we know it. There are maritime industries, there are arts and culture, hospitality. A lot of those are in our strategic plan. We give loans to other types of businesses, but those are the ones we get excited about. And then we have a brownfields program as well. There's a flyer there if you're interested, and Max is the person to talk to about that. But we're really hoping that that program will kind of get our brownfields up and working again. Our next one, we have this new software. It's the Esri Business Analyst. And so we can provide economic analyses for different geographies or businesses. And we've had municipalities reach out and say, hey, what's the feasibility of this business coming into our town? And we've been able to give them a sense. So if you're interested in that, feel free to reach out. Our next step is the Midcoast Entrepreneurial Hub. This is centered in the Brunswick region right now. And we're essentially pulling together different economic organizations such as CEI, SCORE, New Ventures Maine, and we're having a conversation about who is not in these entrepreneurial spaces and why. And so it's really so that we can try and round out the support for those underserved populations. And this is just in its very initial stages, but Alexis and I have been working on it, and it's really fun. So. And then it wouldn't be a General Assembly without talking about our CEDS either. That's our Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy. So we gave an update over the summer, but I just wanted to remind everyone, Max and I sent out a survey like a year ago or more, and a lot of you filled it out. And those municipal infrastructure projects are now eligible for funding from EDA. So reach out to Max if you're, thinking about any of those. And then the CEDS is sort of the start of our data bank for a lot of different topics, including economy. So we'll get into it from there. So this is our just kind of some general labor force insights. Thinking back to that purple table, we're thinking also about age here, and it's similar color coded. These are the number of people, number of workers who are at that age bracket in the labor force category. And so as we, kind of look down, Rockland Camden really jumps out. The LMA, that's labor market area, that's essentially Knox County, but it's slightly shifted. So we can see, the trends from Knox County that we saw earlier really playing out in their employed labor force, where the highest age bracket, most populous age bracket, is 50 to 64 in their employment sector, or in their employed sector of the labor force. And then, whereas the Belfast region actually has a much younger employed population, similar to Waldoboro, whereas Brunswick and Boothbay are somewhat more in the middle. And then just looking at, industry changes, this is for the entire Midcoast region. And we have this data broken down by labor market area on our story maps page. So feel free to, if you're curious about your own region, feel free to, go on the website and look at that. But I just wanted to give kind of a high level overview of the trends in the whole region. So this is the first chart is change in employment. So that's just number of people. And it's as a percentage from using 2018 as our base mark. And then this is change in wages by industry, again, using 2018 as our base mark. So 2018 is at 100, and it's a percentage of that. So if it's got dipped below 100, then it's decreased from 2018. So just to start off with kind of two of the industries that are of interest, I think. Forestry, fishing, and hunting. It's mostly fishing, but there is some farming as well. That's in red here, and that, decreased over the pandemic and really hasn't fully recovered since in terms of number of employment. And then similar story in terms of wages there. The other one is accommodation and food services. There are a lot of hospitality industries, and it's followed a pretty similar trend in terms of change in employment. Its wages have recovered. So that's aggregate wages. And then the other one that has dipped, which is really interesting, is administrative and support and waste management and remediation services. Mouthful, but that's the one in orange. And I'm not totally sure what that's about, but it is a trend. So I sort of wonder if it's recycling, but I don't know. I'm very curious. So, and then the ones that have, kind of increased the most is this gray one here, management of companies and enterprises. That's true for both metrics, and then professional, scientific, and technical services. So we can kind of see this shift, away from, accommodation and food services, fishing and hunting, into more of kind of the office jobs, management jobs. So that's what we're seeing. But all of the different labor market areas are they see such different trends. So I really encourage you to go check out your own labor market area. Yeah. Oh, okay. So great question. This is just the top 8 the top 8 that changed the most. So I listed kind of the major changes, but for the most part, healthcare and education have stayed incredibly stable across both metrics. And then I have a table of the ones that aren't in this, on this chart of the major changes for each labor market area on the website as well. And then an important piece of the economy is land use as well. So this is an aggregate map of the growth and non-growth areas. This was just a lot of data crunching where I gathered all the growth and non-growth maps from the different municipalities and georeferenced them and then drew lines. And so it's very rough. This is meant for planning purposes only. But it does give kind of a sense of where things are contiguous, where it's become choppy. We see which municipalities don't have growth and non-growth. And that's really important when you're thinking about kind of like overall economy. Yeah, Dan.
Don't have data for that's safe to say if you need a comprehensive plan on it.
Could be. This is also a couple years old at this point. This was one of my first first kind of major mapping projects with MCOG, so it's fun to bring this chart back. I wouldn't, yeah. Anyways, John.
Just because we have to do the recording and everything.
I'm not sure about each of these individual communities, but there is a provision in the growth management law where if a municipality meets certain criteria, it can get a growth area exemption. So if through the comprehensive planning process, you get a growth area exemption, you would show up as one of these communities that may appear to not have a comprehensive plan or a growth area is designated.
That's true. If that was the case, I marked the entire community as non-growth. I know that's the case for Westport Island, since they're just a pile of rocks, basically. And so, and they're a very beautiful pile of rocks. But you can't really grow a lot on there, in terms of economic development. So anyways, the one thing that I do see in this chart is, we see that Route 1 corridor and the growth areas along that. So moving on to transportation. So it was a big part of our SEDS. It's a big part of our strategic plan. The thriving, we've become part of a Thriving Communities program. So it's a 3-year program meant to understand the transportation needs in the region and evaluate the feasibility of transit expansion, which is really exciting. So we're right in the middle of it. We've had sub-regional meetings. We've done strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats analysis. That's the SWOT analysis, and come up with a baseline assessment of needs. And the next step, so starting in early winter, is the targeted timeline and finishing by summer. We're building off that baseline assessment to develop a full transit feasibility study across the whole Midcoast region, which is really exciting. And 80's put in a ton of work into that. So I'm really, really excited to have more data to play with and look into it further. So through the SEDS and sort of thinking about our current traffic, I just wanted to bring up some of the volume of traffic, especially along the Route 1 region. So these are just the 5 most kind of trafficked road segments in our region using MDOT data. And we see parts of Route 1 that get, significantly more than 295. And this is a major commute corridor. And so, and I'd imagine that Route 1 also has more seasonality. In the summer, its peak is even more than this. This is the annual average. So if you took all of the cars throughout the entire year and divided it by 365, that's what you would get. So if you did this and looked at peak season versus off season, these numbers would probably be even higher in peak season. And then there's, big numbers here in Knox County and Waldo County as well. So that just kind of gives a sense of the overall volume of traffic that we're seeing. We've also dived into kind of the town-to-town movements across the region. And so this is just one example of the Belfast labor market area in Waldo County. These lines just show movement from Liberty into Belfast or Belfast and back. And I just chose this labor market area because it's so neat. We see all of these, it's kind of like all roads lead to Belfast here. The other labor market areas are not so neat. They're quite a bit more complicated. And so I'd encourage you to go look at our transportation story map and see what yours is like. So then, we also have to realize that we don't just exist as a bubble and people commute outside of our area. So this is commute to, major cities outside of the MCOG region. Of course, the Brunswick to Freeport, transit connection is strong. And then I was really intrigued by Augusta having just such a large catchment zone. You know, here it has at least 100 routes per day on average, on a year-round average, from every single labor market area except the Boothbay Peninsula, which is just a smaller, smaller labor market area. And so I thought that was really interesting, and we'll come back to this as well. So the next, yeah, yes. Me too. The source is from Streetlight, and they changed their methodology, so I don't love what they produce now, which is a shame. And Streetlight is a data set that uses cell phone technology to track movement, which sounds creepy. Maybe it is. Yeah, but they don't know who you are. They just know where your phone is. So yeah, it's not me. Yeah, so then they changed it anyways. They changed it to the car data so that they know where your car is instead of your phone. But MDOT is we're getting rid of our subscription with Streetlight. So I agree though, trends have changed so much since the pandemic. So next bit, this is really, really interesting, I find. So we've gotten some new pickup and drop-off data. This is through the Thriving Communities program that we've been able to analyze this. The raw data comes from Waldo Cap, and they manage the Midcoast Public Transportation, which is essentially it's MaineCare's primary transportation provider. 90% of their calls come from the MaineCare program. And then they also provide as needed transportation. It's just a lesser amount of their call volume. This is a really preliminary analysis. It's not published yet, but we wanted to give you a sneak peek of what's to come. And I think it's really neat. So these are these hexagons. You can imagine, they're a 1 mile radius, except they're not a circle, they're a hexagon. And then this is pickup count data. So essentially Waldo Cap gets a call. They say, okay, we're gonna go to, this part of Brunswick. And then that gets logged in their data set. And it's color coded by pickup count. So the ones in purple are 166 counts and more, for instance. And we just see how spread out that is across our whole region. This is a very rural part of Maine, and they're still seeing a lot of calls. And then you see, clusters in the centers as well, Belfast, Knox County, and Brunswick and Bath. I think they will be. We'll see. They're not on this map. But yeah, we haven't released the map yet. So okay. So this shows the top 10, and it's a lot more than 160. So I wanted to just kind of run through just the sheer volume of calls that they're getting, just to really indicate the demand. In the Brunswick top zone, these two squares, these two hexagons, they're getting in the 2-year call, or 2 years of calls, they've gotten over 17,000, which averages to 23.5 trips per day. Bath, 14,000. Rockland, it's 4 hexagons, so it's more area, but still they've gotten 52,000, more than 52,000 calls in a 2-year period. So that's 72 calls per day on average in Rockland. And then Belfast is similarly getting quite a few. And this isn't normalized to their population. Belfast, this region, this catchment zone is a lot less populous, but it's still getting a lot of calls. So we see this demand for alternative transportation. This is just a histogram. It's kind of another way of slicing the data. But ultimately, the takeaway is that the movement is significant. There's just a lot of volume, and there's these really concentrated areas of demand. And so that's what the next step is going to be with the feasibility study. So hopefully, next year we'll be presenting on that. And this is from, oops, wait a sec. I went too far. Don't get up and stretch yet. So this is, the initial kind of wish list from Waldo Cap, just with them knowing what they know and seeing what they see. They want bus routes, along these areas, and they think that would be kind of help to meet demand, which is really interesting. Okay, now we can get up and stretch. I know it's after lunch. Feel free to stand up. I just threw a lot of data at you, and I am about to throw a lot more at you. So, yeah. Okay. Yeah. So with that, I want to take two questions, just because that was a lot of data to run through. And I'll cap the number of questions at 2, and then we'll move on to the next section, and then there will be a time for questions after. So I wanted to open it up if anyone had any questions right now. I guess we kind of ask questions along the way too. So yeah, Mark.
I can't remember if I've asked this before, but with that Waldo County cap data, is there anything else additional? So I know there's additional rides going on because I know Brunswick Taxi Service is a provider. I'm sure there's other providers as well. How does some of that information align, or is that data that you've gotten yet on like other independent services that?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, do you want to? Yeah, great.
Oops. I think that this data includes any sort of contracted services. So whether that's through WCAP's own vehicles or their contractors. Yeah, they're subcontractors. So this should be all of those services. What this doesn't include is, any sort of fixed route services. This is all demand response data. Or any sort of like volunteer ride services. And we're hoping to incorporate that as part of this. So we can really track all of that and kind of overlay it with the general traffic volume as well. So we can really get a sense of what the movement is throughout the region and what the volumes are, and therefore what the opportunity is for sustaining transit services and at what scale.
Great, good question. Yeah.
Right. And the second question.
Real quick, but Charlotte, is there a way to track remote work data yet?
It's my favorite question.
Yeah, Matt and I talk about this a lot. Yeah, there is through census data, and that's only going to get you so far though. It is something that we are constantly looking at a better data source for. So if anyone has any ideas, let me know. But it's something that we check periodically. So yeah.
Pull it up.
I don't know, can towns create? I think that would be pretty hard. Yeah, it's really hard to know. Sure.
All right. AD knows how towns can create data on remote work. No pressure on you.
Tell me, AD.
If we go through a comprehensive plan process, the questions about remote work is something that we usually include in our community surveys. Right now we're seeing about somewhere between 10 and 20% response rates for towns. So we have some of that information, but it's just, I don't know if it's statistically significant, but you can compare that to the census data and yeah.
Yeah. Good question. It is always something that we're curious about because we've seen a lot of demographic shifts. And with that economy piece of, management of companies and professional services increasing, you'd think that, you know what? Let's chat because I just thought of a way to potentially drill down into that by proxy. So great. That was 2 questions. I'm going to cap it there. We're going to get into the housing gaps analysis update. So that's why we had to stretch because this is a lot. So this is an updated version from 2 years ago. I presented at the GA in 2023, our housing gaps analysis. It was based off of the main housing production needs study. And that is the study that says, we need 80,000 homes by 2023. And we thought, okay, that's great for the state, but let's really drill down and see what that means for the Midcoast region as well. So this is just a kind of reminder of, this was our 2023 housing gaps analysis. So this was using 2021 data. There's always a 2-year lag with ACS data. And we really see home, owned, occupied, or owner occupied housing. We really see that missing middle need. And then this is, potentially a dual income missing middle need. With renters, it's not quite as significant, or it's not quite as stark. We see that missing middle, but also needs at the lower levels of income. So that's just a reminder of our previous study using 2021 data. Our new study looks pretty different. There's just one chart for all of the homes that are needed. Key differences, it's no longer lines, it's a bar chart. We got some feedback from Maine Housing that I thought was really good to turn it into a bar chart instead. The other main difference is tenure. We didn't break it up by owner versus renter needs. We will do that, and I'll show you that in the next slide. And then, another major difference is just that the outcome is different. So the way that you read this graph is, it's not like a normal stacked bar chart. I made it as a stacked bar chart, and it just was really hard to compare across labor market areas. And so the way that you read it is, you just look at the top of the color and where that corresponds to the housing units needed on the vertical axis. That's the number. So Rockland, Camden, LMA needs essentially 150. You don't have to subtract this. I didn't want any sort of subtraction like a normal stacked bar chart, because it was really hard to compare across labor market areas. So with that, if you just kind of focus on one color, right now we can focus on purple because that's the easiest, Brunswick labor market area, we see needs at the much lower levels of income here. That is partly in response to our housing becoming even less affordable since our last study, if you can believe it or not. And so that shifts the need towards the lower levels of income, and I can get into the math later with you on that if you'd like. And then, let's look at blue. Let's look at the Belfast labor market area. It starts off, it's the less than 20K population needs even less than Booth Bay Harbor LMA in yellow, and then it kind of evens out. So it's a much more even, the Belfast labor market area has a much more even spread of housing units across all levels of income. And so that's a different, there's a different kind of result of this gaps analysis compared to the last one as well, where we're not seeing that, missing middle need. Our next, so the way that we broke it up for owned needs versus rental needs is now by income instead of by, taking the number of units that's needed and kind of projecting that on the current percentage of income and renter. That's the way we did it last time. This time we just said, okay, we need this many units. How many of those, per each income bracket, and how many of those are less than 80% AMI, area median income, for that municipality? All of the area median incomes fell kind of at the higher end of, or kind of really in the middle of this 51 to 75K. So anything below 80% AMI fell, within these 3 income brackets to less than 50K. Those are most likely renters. They're not definitely going to be renters, but the majority of people making less than 80% AMI aren't going to buy a new home. And then the 80 to 100% AMI could be owner or renter. That's, that's on a case-by-case basis. And then above 100% AMI, above area median income, most likely owners, not necessarily, but most likely. And then just to, pool the units, the total units needed for the whole region. For renters is, just shy of 2,000, just over 500, and just shy of 900. So.
It's on the website?
Not yet. This is very, very, very new. It'll be on the website in a week or 2. Yes, you're so special. Great. And then future needs. So again, we have a range because this is hard to predict, but essentially it's how much is there going to be growth. And we looked at that for the whole region. So it's, roughly between 2,000 and 3,000, and then broke it down by labor market area as well. So just to kind of think critically about this data, and not just in terms of, okay, these income brackets, renter, owner, like it's easy to put people in a box as planners, but I want to kind of step into the human side of things and think, who in your community needs these units? And this is a question anyone can answer. If you were to, build new units, who would move in? Yeah, Yvette. Downsize. Yeah, yes, totally. Anyone else? Yeah, Kevin.
Bus drivers, staff.
Yeah, employees. Yeah, people who are kind of settling into their careers. Yeah, definitely. It's like, I think that was something with our last gaps analysis, is we kind of left it at, this kind of like really kind of hard data, and we didn't really, I think, include this human piece of it. And this is I think a big improvement of our last gaps analysis, is thinking, who in our community needs these units. So yeah, older homeowners who need to downsize, people who are settling into their careers and want to work and live in this one area for a long time. So we chose to look at it through the lens of the housing continuum. This is something Alexis brought in as a framework, and Matt and Alexis and I have had a lot of really deep conversations about this. And this is sort of, for the average median person, we have relative income, relative age. As you get older, your income increases, and then, you might retire and it goes back down. And then through that, people tend to track through this housing journey of, start off with a rental unit after school, and then maybe they upgrade to a starter home and buy their family home as they settle into their, longer term jobs, and then they downsize for retirement. And so we wanted to think of our housing gaps analysis and our housing needs in the region through this lens. And first was to just chart that progression of age. This is age on the bottom here, and income, household income here. And we see that, pretty perfect bell curve as you aggregate all the data of the whole Midcoast region. It's very satisfying. So, and then, you look and each LMA has their own, their own little angulation and flavor of it. For the Booth Bay Harbor, that yellow one, they didn't have any data for households under 20, households who the primary householder is under the age of 25. I think that's yeah, that's something about the LMA. And so that was, interesting to chart that for our whole region. And then we wanted to know kind of where are the sticky points for that, is it rental to starter home? Is that where we're getting stuck? Is it upsizing into the family home? Is it downsizing? There's a bunch of ways of thinking about it. And the key is that it's different for each of your communities. It's different in each LMA, it's different in each community. And so I'm gonna walk you through kind of one way of thinking about one of the sticky points that we did, and then we're gonna look into some town level data. I'm gonna breeze through this pretty quickly for the sake of time, but essentially we start off thinking about the universe of owner-occupied units. And a certain amount of those units are owner-occupied with 3 bedrooms or more, and then the rest is 2 or fewer. Another way of thinking about it is owner-occupied by age 65 or older, and then the rest is younger than 65. And so where does that overlap? Where essentially how many, we're trying to target how many families are where the householder is over the age of 65 and they're living in a room with 3 bedrooms or more, And that's sort of what Yvette was getting at is, you know, potentially they're in that situation because they're unable to downsize. So, you know, if we look at, let's say that they take up the whole universe of owner-occupied housing, that's the low estimate. Let's say we slide this kind of purple chart, you know, owner-occupied age 65 or more, we slide that over. This is the high estimate because it's all overlapping. And then there's everything else. And this is what we found. So we see this, you know, low estimate of, you know, upwards of 8%, you know, 8 to 21% of the owner-occupied homes. That's not of all of the homes in each labor market area, but that's of the owner-occupied homes that are occupied by a householder age 65 or older with 3 or more bedrooms. And so we see that that's a sticky point in that housing continuum. There are more sticky points, but you know, we can kind of identify this as one for a lot of our labor market areas. So again, it's going to be different with each town. And so this is our new, we've gone away from story maps a little for this one. We're using a new software, which is more of a website and it's more clickable. And so we're just gonna start clicking. Yeah, sorry, Max, I wanna make sure that I'm gonna share my screen onto Zoom. Thank you.
Sit down, relax.
Any questions on that before Jeremy?
Curious.
If I moved that, I could have left it open.
You know, you mentioned the number of units, dwelling units, and then the state says we need 80,000 dwelling units or something.
Mm-hmm.
How many bedrooms do we need? I mean, that's to me what the issue is not dwellings unless we define what dwellings are. And I'm just curious for your purpose there, what was a dwelling defined as? And if you know what the state, when they say we need 80,000 dwelling units, what that means, like how many people is that housing?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And I think that is going to be different for each town. And I feel like a broken record saying this, but each community is so unique where some communities are, you know, more bedroom communities with a higher retirement population and they'll need fewer bedrooms. Some communities are, you know, more of a business hub for other municipalities and they're going to be more, you know, I don't know, it just changes with the demographic. And so I think it's, that would be a really interesting way to quantify it. We've quantified it as the number of units, so thinking about it as the number of families, whether they have kids or not. But I think it's also important to, you know, think about the movement through those houses with different germs, like you're kind of, I'm guessing, getting at. Yeah, so I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it. And we can certainly, you know, if your community, if any community is interested in digging into this further, we can help with an assessment and we can tailor that data to a conversation that makes sense to you as well.
I think that's where this gets lost is
Yeah.
that what are the numbers? I don't even think the state knows this number of like what are we trying to house? How many people are we trying to house?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, I think that's really where we all need to get to the bottom of.
Yeah.
Get to the bottom of this 80,000 dwelling units means nothing to me.
Mm-hmm.
When how many people are we trying to house?
Mm-hmm.
How many people are looking for bedrooms?
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point.
So just a quick question from 80 and then we'll be ready to continue.
Sorry, just a comment on that, the
Yeah.
bedrooms thing. You know, I think it's really interesting to think about housing in terms of the number of bedrooms, but I think something from just like going through comprehensive planning processes with communities is just seeing the average household size decreasing and decreasing and decreasing. And so, you know, I think if there's a willingness to have more people per house, that's an issue. But I think the fact is people haven't been willing to share homes or to increase the density like within their own homes. And so, that's sort of where the bedroom thing becomes a little bit moot. And I think that's part of this part of the housing conversation, but it's also part of the housing crisis, and why it's gotten so bad is also, you look at Searsmont had, 2,800 people back in the 1800s, but the number of housing units was pretty small. And now there's not enough housing and the population is 1,400. So, I think the bedroom question doesn't get at it's not going to solve the problem unless we are able to have a cultural shift.
Well, and you have a lot of units, houses, large homes, and I think you spoke to it, that are occupied by one or two people. They can't get out of that home because of the way the economics are today and the interest rates are today. They can't buy something smaller, which enables those younger families to buy into something larger to support the family. They're still a starter. So it's like
Smaller doesn't
Yeah.
exist.
What's that?
Something smaller doesn't exist. We need to build it.
Well, it would exist if the people who live in the bottom buy the bigger one,
Right.
and the people who don't want the bigger one anymore buy the smaller one.
Right.
If there wasn't this impasse with the price.
Tinder on housing.
Yes.
Conversation.
Okay,
Great roundtable discussion going on.
Yeah,
But you
awesome.
have something to show us.
great. So this is the housing continuum. Experience, it's called. So I hope you all have an experience. There's, essentially it runs through what we just talked about with the housing continuum. And then, we were just kind of talking about how each of our municipalities have their own challenges, have their own unique data. And we wanted to provide something that was applicable to just each town, drill in farther than just the labor market area. So this is, a map, it's interactive, you can scroll in. Since we're in Owl's Head, I wanted to just click on Owl's Head and bring this up so you can see it better. So this is, over on this side is I'm gonna use the pointer instead of the mouse. Over on this side is our new, where'd it go? It's our new gaps analysis here. And then this is just the gaps analysis for the Rockland-Camden labor market area. If you click one more, this is that, age and income housing continuum for the town. And you can click on any town and it has this data. And you can see, we saw with some labor market areas, it had its own kind of skewness, and the towns are also very much have their own skewness. So for just using Owl's Head as an example, they unfortunately don't have data under the age of 25. I think there are just not enough householders age 25 and younger for it to be statistically significant for census data. And then, the 25 to 44 is this is household income around 90K, and then 45 to 64 bumps up even more. And then, well, this is 65 and over. You can't see that because I'm talking. But 65 and over, their household income comes down quite a bit to that 40,000. And so what we did, there's a lot of different interpretations of this, but what we did is essentially we took that age bracket, and that's the median income for that age bracket, median household income for that age bracket. So we're going back to our gaps analysis for that labor market area, and I just put the text over, the age bracket column in the gaps analysis for that age bracket. And so the median household income for age 65 and over falls under this category here. And we see, it's quite a bit under that 25 to 44 and that 45 to 64. But this population has probably been owning their own home for a while. And so now looking at the gaps analysis and seeing that they're in that likely renter kind of group down here, that's not necessarily a population that's going to want to rent. Maybe some of them will, given the current housing situation, but that's where we see that perhaps that's where it's stuck. You know, we see that as an issue. And so this is not to say that we have to build these many homes for the 65 and over. It's just putting it all together to see where it sort of is breaking down. And so that was just, you know, one example, but I wanted to get into, we can look at another community if anyone wants to share that. Or Mike, did you have a question first?
Yeah, I got a question.
Yeah.
How hired people quantified in terms of income? Because I'm just thinking like my income compared to my retired parents, we've got very different budgets in terms of what what we're looking at in terms of housing.
Yeah.
And their income might be less than mine, but they're definitely spending more money now. So
No, I hear your point, and you know, you can kind of think as income decreases, perhaps assets and wealth go up. It's really hard to quantify that. There's not good data on the wealth side of things. And so
how does the census view like retired income? Is that just
that's income. Yeah, that's income. Yep. So age 65 plus, that's their retired income. Yeah.
Say that
Alexis, please.
Research suggests that for certain groups, as income declines, income sort of goes up and then comes down, and wealth goes up, sort of increases as income goes down, for those that are of a certain race and a certain income, or a certain age, so that we can't track that wealth trajectory, but that is sort of what's underlying the difference between income coming in and ability to afford things that sort of don't necessarily align with what your income is suggesting.
Mm-hmm.
I was gonna ask, can we look at Newcastle?
Let's look at Newcastle. Yeah, might as well. Okay. So that's this one.
Testing her geography right here.
No, that's all not true. I'm sorry. Okay, so we see the green labor market area here. It's pretty spread out. We see that, you know, a bit of a missing middle and a bit of a low income need, as well as a higher income need. But it's, you know, pretty spread out.
Build all.
Yeah, built. We need all homes. Again, no data under the age of 25. It's got a pretty similar, you know, actually very similar to Owl's Head, not quite as high up here and not quite as low. So there's not quite as much of a disparity to Owl's Head. And then, but you see that, you know, you see that kind of invert, you know, where the 65 and over, they're in the renter or owner. That sort of makes sense. That sort of makes sense. So I don't know if you have any comments on it.
No, it's helpful.
Great. That's the goal. Phew. Anyone? We've got about 5 more minutes. We can take questions. We can look at another community. Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, I was waiting for this. I was curious, you've talked a lot about the sticking point for retirees leaving a larger home to a smaller home and, you know, the cultural ideas around renting, et cetera, et cetera. I'm curious if there's been any thoughts towards, you know, you put the starter home on there, and I wonder, you know, I'll say that a starter home wasn't really an option for me because I feel like I waited too long. I was in that late 20s to 30s wanting a family home, so I never did a starter home. I just rented to that, and I've been lucky enough to be able to make that work. But has that been identified as any sticking point, that like starter home being missed out on because the renter is taking longer? You just didn't mention it, so I was just curious.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, definitely. I didn't mention it because I only had an hour. But yes, I mean, across all of our communities, we really have sticking points at every single step of the way. but that is a huge sticky point as well. You know, we see that a lot. And there's a graph that's on here. I didn't bring it up, but essentially it shows these age brackets. I'm gonna go back. So it shows these age brackets, and then it just shows the number of owner-occupied homes versus the number of renter-occupied homes in a bar chart, you know, all on the same graph. And the number of owner-occupied homes essentially just goes up and up and up and up and up. And then renter-occupied homes goes up a little bit, and it stays pretty level. That could be, there's a couple different, you know, ways of thinking about that. One is that there is, you know, unfortunately and sadly, a certain population that will get into rental housing and then never be able to make that leap into home ownership, and they stay in rental housing throughout. But with it being, you know, we see that increase in home ownership is so drastic, and then the decrease in renter ownership is just not, it doesn't really decrease that much. And so with that, we're seeing sort of two effects, one of them being the stickiness. So absolutely. Yeah.
We got 3 different questions.
How are you factoring in the Airbnb type units versus long-term rental? Because that's a huge issue in the Boothbay Peninsula where I happen to be from.
Thanks, Dad. So all of these are, Dad's on the planning board and I just come. So all of these are long-term renter occupied units. This doesn't factor in short-term renter occupied units or short-term rentals, but we do have a really good data set on that, on short-term rentals. It's definitely a separate issue that is, you know, its challenges are unique to different municipalities, and those challenges go hand in hand with the seasonal units as well. And there's some overlap between Airbnb or short-term rental and the seasonal units, but you know, they're taking a lot of the housing, but they're also an integral part of some communities' housing and economy as well with that seasonality. So this data is really just looking at the long-term renter versus owner-occupied homes, but we do have other resources on short-term rentals and starting to think about seasonal units as well. Do you want to talk about short-term rentals, Alexis? It certainly plays to the stickiness, yes.
So we just have 2 questions. Yvette, you had a question first?
So I just saw something recently that showed that Bodenham was actually growing, and it had to do with the MSAD 75 school project, capital project there, facilities project. So that was interesting to me, but then also a couple of slides back, I saw that it said 79% of renters in Bodenham pay over 30% of their income. I was just kind of curious, like, I wanted to see Bodenham because I'm thinking of some of these things, but I don't think it's really going to speak to, you know, how much the rent should be, or, you know, really show any of these things. But I was curious, like, what if it was a more dramatic.
Yeah, let's look. Thank goodness I clicked on Bodenham, not Boden. So here's the age range for Bodenham. And then, so it's pretty clustered into, you know, owner occupied units there. So, and again, this is to remind people, if this data, you know, that you can imagine a bell curve, because this is the median income. So I sort of imagine, you know, there is a bell curve under this 25 to 44, if you can imagine that. I don't know. I can like really kind of visualize the data. So this is just the median. It doesn't mean that there aren't 25 to 44-year-olds who would purchase in this category or in this category, or even in you know, these categories down here. It just shows the median. So okay,
I think one last question, and I think we need to get into breakout groups. Right.
Are all of these houses that are factored in, are these homes that are occupied at least 6 months a year. You don't know. There's a Maine is the primary residence. You don't know how long it's occupied, but at least it's the primary.
Yes, it's for primary residents. Yep.
Any closing thoughts before we break into groups?
No, I don't. Thanks so much. Go look at your own communities, and this is live. It's not on our website yet, but it will be very soon. I'll get there.
Yes. I think to the point that Charlotte made really eloquently, it's not enough just to know how many units are needed to fill a gap. It's like from a policy perspective, we believe that it's more useful to know not only how many units are needed, but for whom. And so this data continuum piece was really meant to get at that question, to help policy and town managers sort of make the decision and help facilitate the right type of housing for your community, not just the addition of units generally. So with all that, thank you, Charlotte. This was really excellent, and lots to think about. So at MCOG, we really believe that the link between sort of understanding local need and policy decision and thinking about regional strategy, data is a huge link in that connection. And so with that as sort of the data backdrop, and there is more on the website, and of course, Charlotte, you could talk with her in detail specifically about each of these different topics. But with that sort of data piece in the background, we are asking and hoping that you guys will sort of think about what topic is of most interest to you. So transportation, or most top of mind at this exact moment, transportation, housing, the economy more broadly, or environmental sustainability, and sort of choose a breakout room based on that preference so that we can sort of think about this data as a frame for a more local conversation about the issues that are sort of at play in each of your communities specifically. So housing is going to stay here. Transportation is going to be go out the door and you make a right. The economy and sustainability conversations are going to be in the red room where lunch was, 2 different tables. So you guys are going to have about a half hour, 40 minutes to talk through a facilitated conversation about each of these topics, and then we'll convene back here to just highlight the big themes that emerge. So thank you.